Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. In recent times, media coverage of papal remarks, especially in the wild, wild west of social media Catholicism, assumes a regrettable and recognizable pattern. The Pope gives a speech or grants an interview, factions immediately weaponize particular statements and explode on it with their quote-unquote hot takes on social media for the sake of the positions that they want to advance. Well, that trend is continuing in the papacy of Pope Leo. Matthew Ramage joins us with more. Dr. Matthew Ramage, professor of theology at Benedictine College, where he serves as co-director of its Center for Integral Ecology. He's also a prolific author, a lover of the scriptures, Aquinas, Ratzinger. Matthew, my friend, how are you?
Marcus, great. Good to be back with you today.
Oh, it's always good when I get to reconnect with you. So I want to humbly ask you to just be very candid about your thoughts here. Do you think that all of those hot takes we are seeing, especially on social media, are the result of people who actually read the whole document?
I'm going to be honest. I'm mostly ignorant of these hot takes because I decided not to look at them. No, it's not that I'm entirely ignorant. Unfortunately, I was at a little faculty meeting and I got to hear some secondhand stories. But I wrote a piece and I decided not to look at other takes first. But I know from having read it that there's no way that a lot of those people read it. You know, I didn't read every single word even before I wrote on it, but I read the vast majority of it, and it took me almost 2 whole days, to write a piece on it. Between reading it and that. So anyway, the thing is that really disturbed me about it, though, Marcus, is we just have this rush to say things rather than receive. This was an hour ago conversation I had. A friend was pointing out, isn't it sad and even tragic when the first disposition of the Catholic is to search for errors in our Holy Father's work rather than to try to learn from it?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there's no problems, but that should not be our first disposition. And, we can go grumpy old men here, but I remember back in the day when Benedict published something or John Paul II, you looked forward to it, right? At least that was the mainstream. So I think we need to really do an examination of conscience here.
I think that's salient, and it's exactly where my heart has landed as well. I haven't written a single commentary on it because, like you, I want to make sure I've read it, and now I want to take some time to think about not just what was said, but his mind, which you did as well, to figure out where he's coming from with some of these thoughts, his deeply Augustinian heritage, so that if I have an opinion to be made, I want to make sure I know that I'm doing the wisdom of our Holy Father justice here.
Exactly, right. And we think we're original, but usually by the time we put something out, it's been said a million times. And of course, you can use AI to summarize it and come up with your commentary. There's all levels upon levels that just proves the Pope's wisdom on this matter. But I really do believe it goes back to, do we have an authentically Christian disposition? It's like reading the Gospels. As a Bible scholar yourself, like Benedict XVI would always criticize the critics for seeking not to receive this in the spirit in which it's written, but to be judges of the text. Now, obviously, he didn't mean we can't do historical criticism, we can't do studies of it, but rather the words of the Holy Father, even when not speaking infallible, are those of our spiritual parent, And so with that disposition, I really enjoyed it. I actually noticed, okay, there's a couple of things people might want to tweak or whatever. That's fine. He's a human being as well. But goodness, I was actually really happy. I loved the biblical exegesis into it. I thought, oh, wow, he's really letting study of the sacred page be the soul of theology, like Vatican II says to do, and like the ancient fathers did. So I actually felt that a lot of this read like a patristic document, unsurprisingly, because he's an Augustinian.
And that comes out immediately. He even appeals to Augustine in the text, just showing his little Augustinian hand there, which I greatly appreciated. The other thing I wanted that immediately stood out to me, Matthew, that I'd like to invite your wisdom on, I noticed a real sense of balanced prudence in the way he writes. There's nothing overt, radical, chaotic. This is a father working hard to show us what the virtuous mean can look like.
Yeah, and on the subject of AI, I thought that especially stood out. I am not a person who ignores AI or uses it assiduously, but I feel like I try to have a balanced view. Of course, everyone thinks that of themselves. And so I was really almost astounded to see how balanced it was, that he is not in favor of going out and all-out AI warfare, by any means, or saying that AI should write your papers for you on the more mundane level. But he also doesn't decry it as intrinsically evil. I think there are some folks who may have wanted to see that sensationalized. But, as I see it, the criterion that he's going for here is, with whatever technology it is, whether it's biomedical developments or AI or a combination, does it really authentically serve man's good, the common good? Does it make us, frankly, more conformed to Jesus Christ, or does it not? And obviously there's some things that are intrinsically evil. I didn't actually look to see if he used that term in the text, but that's the sort of thing I saw. And I also noticed, just from like a angry email I received this morning about it, some people wish he had said other things. And I had to explain to this person, he's not going to weigh in on every bioethical issue here. He's also assuming some knowledge. So I think there is always going to be confusion because the Pope doesn't address every last possible issue. But I really thought he did a phenomenal job giving enough principles to really give the direction for the rest of us to go and to apply it.
Exactly, that he leaves the room for us to discern case by case how we're going to exercise it, but he gives us enough of the prudential guardrails so that we can exercise our proper jurisprudence here.
Yeah, and with regard to, say, I guess there were some comments on war, right? The comments on the history of slavery. I thought those were interesting from a development of doctrine point of view. It's not what I focused on in my writing about it, but I just have little isolated highlights here and there. The comment about slavery and kind of apologizing for the church's, gradual development, to say the least, on that front, reminded me of John Paul II in the year 2000 Jubilee Day of Pardon. Amongst other things, begging forgiveness for our past omissions and commissions in relation to the people of Israel. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And, I had someone tell me, well, he wasn't historically sensitive enough to the church that already denounced slavery, et cetera. Well, that may be true, but I thought that was really great that he doesn't come out and have a radical break to say the church has been terrible, now let's overthrow it, right? But he also doesn't whitewash it. So I see that as the virtuous mean that he's trying to enact and to model for us.
And to redraw to that center in the whole document, everything he wrote on is asking the question, does, in this case, his engagement, facilitate the language of humans being allowed to be more human? Can you help us understand that deeper?
Oh, yeah, allowing us to be more human. Oh, goodness, yeah. Does the technology foster our true humanity, or does it make us into mere machines? Something I didn't have space to write on, I already went 1,000 words over what I was supposed to in my essay for Catholic World Report, is I love the section or sections really on the things we can do as bearing God's image that a machine will never do. The machine may beat us in just raw computing power, right? It's going to beat you at chess, for example. It's going to predict things way better than you could. But it doesn't experience joy. It doesn't have sorrow. It doesn't have physical experiences. I love that expression of embodiment that the document was talking about. And, he didn't mention this one, but it can't ask authentic questions either. It can simulate it. But it doesn't have reflection upon reflection. It doesn't know what it's doing like we are. So that'd be fun to talk about, too.
My guest is Dr. Matthew Ramage. He is a professor of theology at Benedictine College, a stalwart defender of the truth of Jesus Christ, and we are talking right now about Pope Leo XIV and his recent encyclical and how we as Catholics ought to develop a obediential, childlike spirit of listening to the wisdom of our Holy Father. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with my dear friend Dr. Matthew Ramage. He is professor of theology at Benedictine College, and we are talking about Pope Leo XIV's recent encyclical on artificial intelligence and the spirit with which you and I ought to be receptive of it. So, Matthew, you were just touching on this whole notion of what the Holy Father is trying to say about being more human and how technology can either work for or against that.
Yeah, and the way the Pope does this, for those who haven't got a chance to read it yet, is he takes two biblical images, the Tower of Babel and Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah is written when the Jewish people are reconstructing the temple after they return from Babylonian exile. And he contrasts these, and he says, in a kind of spiritual exegesis, says, hey, look, these are relevant today. The Tower of Babel is the primordial event of man trying to surpass his own limits of becoming his own God without God. Of course, that's the narrative of the fall of Adam as well. And then Nehemiah, though, is a earthly city. It's locatable on a map. It's at a specific time period. But the fascinating thing that Leo notes is that the whole community contributed to helping building the walls, of restoring the city. And he said, look, one is being done collaboratively and with God's grace. The other one is trying to attain divinity by our own power. Well, God does want us to attain his own divinity. The doctrine of theosis, divinization. The Son of God became man so that the sons of men might become God, St. Athanasius, and the whole patristic tradition with it. So the problem isn't wanting to become like God and fully immersed in the life of the Trinity. It's doing it by our own power. So again, like I was emailing someone earlier, the church is by no means against using technology to heal people, as long as it's not intrinsically evil what we're doing, but not to enhance us to the point of being, say, cyborgs, right? So, I wish I could have retinal surgery to fix my left eye that doesn't work. Well, maybe that'll happen someday, but it's not. But that's different than, say, going in and giving myself 25 vision or, quote unquote, X-ray vision or something. So the church is not just saying people have to sit there and suffer, that we have to completely turn our back on human innovation. Not at all. Benedict, in a text you probably recall, he says that properly done, technology is a response to the command to till and keep the earth. But the church has parameters within which it's truly humane and truly conforming us to God versus leading us away from God.
Matthew, to just deviate from the wisdom you put forth in your article to tackle, based on what you just said, to tackle one of the criticisms against the Holy Father. I encountered this secondhand. Here again we have a modernist pope commenting on a modernist issue rather than being the vicar of Christ and talking about the salvation of souls. I found that not only to be disrespectful, but rather myopic. Can you please speak to that?
It's funny because I hadn't heard that one yet, but he specifically brings up the term salvation.
Amen.
And he is most definitely talking about salvation of souls. He brings up the false salvation offered by technology, right? I'm looking at it right here. It's paragraph 117. So that's stunning. I don't even want to know who said it, right? But that's the sort of thing you're encountering. It's also just ignorant of history. People think that the church is teaching truth in a vacuum. All the church's teachings originated in response to specific situations. Christ himself, the Gospels, the Bible as a whole, it was the historical situation of the people of Israel. But then those truths, because God is the primary author of Scripture, it applies to all of us. Like the Christological teachings emerged in very specific, concrete pastoral situations. So there's a kind of myth, I guess, that goes around that the church has these perennial truths. She just kind of drops down from on high, and that's not the way it works.
Right. While the church condemns Gnosticism, somehow when we talk about the papacy and the curia, we have this almost Gnostic view of how they appeal to the new teachings of God.
Yeah, right. And speaking of Gnosticism, there's a line that my wife always brings up because we're both big C.S. Lewis, big Inklings fans in general, and he has that essay on the inner circle. Man, it makes you feel good when you're part of the inner circle, right? Like, you think all right. By the way, this is not meant against converts. I got taught by converts. I'm a cradle Catholic. I'm a revert of sorts. But, there was a Catholic World Report article by Carl Keating recently. One temptation of converting or reverting, I've actually seen it more amongst reverts, is you keep reverting. Like, you keep wanting to go to the inner circle, the more inner circle, because, man, you feel good. You're able to see through you have this special knowledge, you might say, gnosis, that the riffraff don't have. So it's a perennial human temptation, and it's just not very appealing to say, well, wait a minute, this is publicly available knowledge. It's just written here by the Pope or taught by the Pope, and yet we have to have that humility. You realize I'm not really that much more insightful or smarter or holy than the next guy or gal. And in fact, Christianity is kind of saying the opposite. You don't have that much wisdom. That's why the church gifted us with, what Christ gifted us with, the church, the papacy, and the bishops. So are they perfect every time? Absolutely not. But wow, I just think it's amazing, this message about how, in fact, Leo says it's not by eliminating weakness, but rather by admitting our weakness that we find fulfillment. And that's what these tech movements a lot of times don't want to do. You want to overcome all limitedness, all suffering. It's just not going to happen on this side of eternity. So one of the great paradoxes of Christianity is the scandal of the cross. I was reminded again today, talking with somebody, it is a scandal to a lot of people. How can you say that suffering is redemptive? We are definitely not saying you just have to sit back and take it. But to eliminate all suffering, Leo said, would ultimately mean extinguishing love. That's a quote from him. And I've seen it in Benedict. I've seen it in John Paul. St. Bernadette said pretty much the same thing. By all means, I just had some cancer removed. I had a kidney transplant. I've had all kinds of stuff done to my body I would have died from many times over by now, even a few decades ago. But we do think at a certain point God has a cross he offers each of us for our specific sanctification, and technology isn't going to take all that cross away.
That's so important to highlight, because Leo actually alludes to that problem of a technological, seeking salvation in technology, a technological messianism, so to speak. All these technocrats are really moving towards transhumanism and this overtly glorified view of the mechanisms that we're creating, but Leo's cautioning us against it.
Yeah, and he actually, uses the term technological divinization that a lot of people seek. Whether it's we're going to upload ourselves into the ether, and exist eternally, as disembodied spirits. Mind you, somebody has to run the servers that this would be on if it were possible in the first place. But yeah, that we're going to be avoiding physical death ever, right? And, I don't have any doubt that we'll develop technologies that delay death and so on and so forth. But a lot of times it stems from a lack of true hope, for hope in eternal life, that no matter how long you live, how many cars you have, anything you get, sexual partners, etc., you're not going to be fulfilled in this vale of tears. Everything you get is a glimpse, as Tolkien would say. Tolkien, who was, of course, quoted here too. It's a glimpse of intermittent glimpse of victory at the end, but it's only Jesus Christ in the end that brings victory. So I know that he can be criticized, like how you use transhumanism. There's no single agreed upon meaning. But then again, he himself acknowledges that. I love the humility. And do you remember he also acknowledges, I can't make all kinds of definitive statements because it'll be out of date next week, basically. So he goes back and gives us the principles. And I believe the principles of this are going to stand up really well even though we'll look back and say, wow, he was concerned about this. Look at this problem we have now. But we'll go back to the principles, and we'll be able to learn a lot as the time goes on.
Can we lovingly touch on the fact that the Holy Father is a similar kind of nerd to many of us? He quotes Tolkien, Augustine, Picasso. I just couldn't help but get a kick out of that.
Oh, my gosh. I was talking about this Tolkien quote with my wife in a coffee shop yesterday, and I won't quote it so I don't butcher it before everybody. But, I love how the quote from Gandalf is basically, I can't know everything what's going on. He used the word tides if you look up the quote. Mm-hmm. But, I can do what I can do for my people, my situation right now. And I had to leave it in God's providence what happens in the next generation. But I took a lot of solace from that. Okay, I'm at one particular teaching location. I have one particular family. You can't control your own kids even, right? But I can at least impart formation to these people. I can learn from these people. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant and something I plan on living by.
Matthew, as usual, the time just flies by whenever I connect with you. Thank you so much for coming on to share your wisdom.
Happy to, Marcus. Have a good one.
You too. My guest has been Dr. Matthew Ramage. He's a professor of theology at Benedictine College. I want to draw your attention to two articles he's written. First, in Catholic World Report, Magnificat Humanitas. The second one, The Digital Papacy. This is on Word on Fire. Both will be linked in the program today. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.